Tom here, and today's video was inspired by one of our viewers. Armando asked if we could dive into the impact of moisture intrusion in homes under negative pressure and the effects on fungal growth, health, indoor air quality. It's a real important topic, so let's break it down together. Being with ProCalcs for so many years in the HVAC industry, I have seen this cause and wreak absolute havoc on homes, especially in very humid climates. If it's not a humid climate, it's not as big of an issue because obviously with humidity, we bring the moisture, and of course mold and fungus and stuff like that loves moisture in dark places. So it's a huge issue when we come to that. Now, some studies that you'll see out there can show that homes can actually pull up to 10 gallons of moisture per day through tiny cracks and leaks. Now, obviously, that has to be in a humid climate. South Florida, parts of Texas. I mean, there's even places on the East Coast. Not too many places on the West Coast, which is one of the reasons my wife loves Southern California, because the humidity is so low and the temperature is so beautiful. But now let's talk about what negative pressure is. Negative pressure happens when the air pressure inside your home is less than the pressure outside. And what happens is the air outside then pushes itself in through the cracks, the crevices, anything that leaks in the attic and roof, depending on the type of insulation you have. And a big cause of negative pressure, you think to yourself, well, wait, if I have a home and it's built tight, what's causing air to be pulled into the home? Well, obviously, if you have wind and stuff outside, it's going to push against the house, and that pressure is going to cause. But what we're trying to do in the home is we don't want that negative pressure. But what happens is we have exhaust fans that get left on, or the exhaust fans are too large for the home. They're not properly sized. Another big issue, which is why we're part of this, is air conditioning ductwork, improperly installed, improperly sealed, can actually create a huge negative pressure in the home. And the way it does this is if we're pulling more air from the return in the home, so the air conditioning system pulls air from the house, puts it through the filter, runs it through the air handler, and then brings it back into the individual rooms. Let's say the air handler's in a closet and the return's right there, so 100% of the air is coming from the house. But the air flows through the air handler into the ductwork. Well, when the ductwork is in the attic, if there are leaks in the ductwork in the attic, let's use a number of 1,000, I'm pulling 1,000 in. But when I go through the supply, I have so many cracks and crevices and loose fittings in the ductwork, I end up with 800, we'll call it CFMs, cubic feet per minute. I only have 800 coming out of all the grills. So I have more air pulling into the air handler and less air coming out that's escaping into the attic. And that causes one of the causes of a house being under negative pressure. Let's think of your house as a sponge, and when we're pulling all that from the negative pressure outside, we're pulling all that moisture in the house. We know that there's things in our house that are very porous. There's couches, there's clothes, there's drywall, there's rugs, there's all kinds of things that we have in our house. And what they do is they absorb that moisture. And when they absorb that moisture, that's where we start to create that path to mold, bacteria, or fungal growth. Now, some of the things that you can look for to see if you have a very large negative pressure is, are doors harder to open or close than they were? Do you hear whistling noises around windows and doors? Do you have excess humidity and condensation on the windows? That's one of the reasons that causes the condensation on windows. Not the only reason. That's one of the main reasons that it happens. Or do you notice unusual drafts or cold spots in the house? But another thing could be that if the house is leakier in one area than the other, or you have more infiltration in one side than the other, you are going to have those hot or cold spots depending on the temperature and whatnot in your home. So let's quickly talk about fungal growth. Now, the moisture encourages mold and mildew. Now, negative pressure can draw moist air from the outside, from damp spaces and whatnot. And when the air comes into contact with cooler surfaces, it condenses. And that condensation, the moisture on there, it ends up being a perfect environment for mold and mildew to grow, especially if it's in a darker place in the home. You can still see it in very bright areas, but mold and mildew bacteria, they love darker places and they love moisture. So once we start that, you can also have a lot of hidden growth in between your drywall. That's a big part. If you have a lot of leaks in the outside that get into between the drywall and the framing, you can actually have tons of moisture and condensation. You may not see it all the time, but you can tell after it's too late that it's already there. So that's a big factor. So what we want to do is we want to really try to keep a slight positive pressure on our home at all times if we can. And we'll talk in a few minutes about how you can do that. Now, what are some of the health implications in this? Obviously, we hear the word mold and we just don't like that. But mold spores and byproducts such as mycotoxins can trigger respiratory problems, including asthma attacks, allergies, irritation, eyes, nose, a lot of different things like that, where we may think we have these, the severe allergy problem, but it's because our house and the indoor air quality is not clean. Overall, one of the biggest issues that we have, we see the mold, we feel humidity, but the biggest impact on this is your health. Indoor air quality is one of the biggest things, and that's why a lot of your building codes throughout the country are wanting tighter and tighter homes. And we ask ourselves, why am I going to make this house so super tight? And if you, in the building codes, the tighter the house is, you get to the point where the building code requires you to bring in outside air. So you say to yourself, well, wait a minute, Tom, you're forcing me to make the house so tight, but now you want me to bring in outside air. Well, why don't I just leave the house wide open, or not wide open, but leaky? Here's the thing, when we're talking about infiltration and mold and whatnot, when we have a house that's too leaky, the problem is we are not able to control what is coming in and how much of what's coming in. Yes, there's calculations we can do by what they call a blower door test, and a blower door test actually puts a negative pressure or positive, depending on how the person's doing it, to determine how big, if you were to put all the leaks together in the home, how big the leak would actually be. And that gives us a determination for the building department of where the house is and if the house needs to be tightened up as part of its construction. Nowadays, a lot of the big builders, like Beazer Home, LGI, Lennar, and some of the other ones out there, they already know how to build these houses so tight. But we'll do another video on how we can purposely bring in outdoor air, but control it, filter it, and make sure that it's brought into the home in the proper manner so that we can control the humidity and the mold and the bacteria and all that stuff that shouldn't be in our homes. So I hope some of this information, and I don't want to make these too long, we're going to do a lot of courses and classes that dive into these things in a lot more detail. Now, make sure you look forward to the next video. Also, if you have comments about topics that you want to hear about indoor air quality, HVAC, but if there's anything specific that you want to talk about, HVAC, indoor air quality, any of those things, go ahead and put it in the comments down below, and we're going to go ahead and do a video just for you. So, hey, listen, folks, it was great talking to you. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next week. ProCalcs University. You can teach the right person anything. You can't teach the wrong person anything. Are you the right person?